January 30th, 1944, Anzio beachhead, Italy. Headman Vera Hoffman sat in his command bunker, gripping a pencil that shook as he wrote against the cold concrete wall. Through the periscope, he had just witnessed something he could hardly believe. The Americans had unleashed artillery with power beyond anything he imagined. Bunker Louisa, gone. 4 feet of reinforced concrete destroyed in a single instant. Smoke and dust cleared to reveal only a crater, where the strong point had stood proudly for 8 months. That position was designed to survive direct hits from 210mm shells, according to Wehrmacht engineering standards. Yet it had been erased completely by just 1 round from a U.S. super heavy gun firing from beyond sight. 32 men of the 3rd Panzer Grenadier Division disappeared along with the tons of steel and concrete that surrounded them. The weapon responsible was the M1 240mm howitzer, making its combat debut with the 697th Field Artillery Battalion. What Hoffman and thousands of German soldiers would soon learn was chilling. Every belief about bunker warfare had just become obsolete. The U.S. Army now had a weapon that could reduce the strongest fortification into rubble with mathematical precision. The story of the M1 began in 1940 with a U.S. Army ordnance study. The conclusion was harsh. Existing American artillery simply couldn't defeat modern European fortifications. The largest gun then in service, the 155mm long Tom, could damage bunkers but not reliably destroy them. German defensive doctrine demanded much stronger weapons. The requirement seemed almost impossible. A mobile gun, able to fire a 360 Lebby shell over 14 miles, with accuracy precise enough to hit individual bunkers, and capable of punching through 6 ft of reinforced concrete. And it had to be transportable by standard military equipment. Unlike the giant railway guns of World War I, the Americans wanted something practical, mobile, and deadly. What emerged from Watervliet Arsenal in New York was a true engineering feat. The M1 weighed 64,700 Lb in firing position and required a 14-man crew. At peak efficiency, it could launch 1 round every 3 minutes. The barrel alone weighed 23,000 Lb and stretched 35 ft, needing a special 6-wheeled wagon for transport. Setting up the gun was no quick task. It averaged 8 hours. Crews had to dig a recoil pit, position the weapon, and use a dedicated M2 crane that accompanied each gun. Production started in November 1942 with 6 pilot models. By 1944, Watervliet Arsenal was producing 13 guns per month, with a total of 315 completed before production ended in August 1945. Each gun cost $380,000, the price of 12 Sherman tanks, but their value on the battlefield was beyond measure. The 697th and 698th Field Artillery Battalions brought the first M1 240mm howitzers to the Anzio beachhead in January 1944. The German 14th Panzer Corps had fortified the hills surrounding the Allies with overlapping bunker systems that controlled every approach. On January 30th, 1944, at 14:30 hours, the 697th fired the very first 240mm round in combat. Its target was a German observation post in the Alban Hills, 23,000 yards, 13 miles away. The shell scored a direct hit, instantly wiping out the bunker, its equipment, and its crew. Major Herman E. Smith, commander of the 697th, recorded the weapon's shocking psychological impact. After just 1 day of firing, German prisoners confessed to complete demoralization. They called the massive rounds earthquake shells that shook the ground for hundreds of meters. Many refused to enter bunkers again after witnessing the devastation. The results at Anzio were carefully documented. Rounds fired, 2,847 bunkers targeted, 67 bunkers destroyed, 61 average rounds per bunker, 8 maximum range achieved, 25,100 yards. When Rome was liberated, Allied forces captured the war diary of the German 715th Infantry Division. One chilling line stood out. American super-heavy artillery makes our fortified positions untenable. Losses from single shells exceed those from day-long conventional bombardments. The gun's reputation grew at Monte Cassino in May 1944. The Gustav Line, anchored on the historic monastery fortified by German paratroopers, had withstood months of Allied attacks. On May 11th, the 240th Field Artillery Battalion, equipped with 8 M1 howitzers, joined Operation Diadem. Positioned near Mignano, they could reach every German position along the Gustav Line. Their main targets were the reinforced bunkers carved into the mountainsides. British Major General Francis Tucker, whose 4th Indian Division had suffered heavily in earlier attempts, witnessed the bombardment firsthand. He reported that the American guns accomplished in days what months of airstrikes and conventional artillery could not. Every direct hit eliminated a strong point completely. The psychological shock on German troops was immense. They realized nowhere was safe. The 240mm guns fired for 72 hours straight during the breakthrough, unleashing 1,147 rounds. Post-battle analysis revealed that of 43 major bunkers targeted, 39 were totally destroyed. The remaining 4 had been abandoned after near misses. But the M1's effectiveness wasn't only about its massive shells. It was the U.S. fire control system that made it unstoppable. The Fire Direction Center, perfected after 3 years of war, allowed accuracy like never before. Forward observers using SCR-610 radios relayed target positions from miles away. Those coordinates went to the FDC, where teams of trained men calculated firing solutions using firing tables, slide rules, and weather data. Within 4 minutes of a call for fire, shells could be raining down on a target 14 miles away, and the time-on-target technique amplified the terror. By staggering fire from multiple batteries, they could ensure every shell struck at nearly the same second. Imagine a bunker suddenly taking 6 240mm shells within 2 seconds, over a ton of high explosives with no warning. Lieutenant Colonel Thomas B. Hedekin of the 245th Field Artillery Battalion summed it up best in his 1944 report. "We don't fire barrages. We fire destruction. We don't fire random barrages, we conduct surgical strikes. A forward observer pinpoints a bunker. We calculate the firing solution and then drop 1 or 2 rounds directly onto it." The accuracy of the 240mm howitzer frightened German soldiers more than massed bombardments ever could. 4 M1 240mm howitzers attached to the 99th Corps took part in Operation Cobra, the July 1944 breakthrough from the Normandy beachhead. The German 352nd Infantry Division had turned every hedgerow and crossroads around St. Lo into fortified positions, creating a deadly defensive maze that had stalled the Allied advance for weeks. On July 24th, the 272nd Field Artillery Battalion brought its 240mm guns into action, systematically wiping out German strongpoints that had withstood even the massive carpet bombing. Hill 122, key high ground dominating St. Lo, was defended by concrete bunkers built into reverse slopes, positions that had survived repeated air attacks. Technical Sergeant Raymond Jones, section chief with Battery A of the 272nd, later explained, "The Germans believed they were safe in those reverse slope bunkers. Our observer called in the coordinates and we fired 3 rounds for effect. When the smoke cleared, there was just a crater where the bunker had been." The psychological effect was immediate. The German 3rd Parachute Division, elite troops who had fought at Cassino, began abandoning their prepared defenses rather than face the 240mm howitzers. Their commander, General Richard Schimpf, was captured on July 31st and told interrogators, "Your super-heavy artillery made static defense impossible. My men, veterans who had never retreated before, ran from their bunkers." Later that year, during the autumn assault on the Gothic Line in northern Italy, the 240mm howitzer proved its worth in mountain warfare. German engineers had spent over a year building fortifications into the Apennine ridges, using the terrain to create positions they thought were safe from any artillery. The 697th Field Artillery Battalion, veterans of Anzio and the advance on Rome, deployed their howitzers in valleys below the Gothic Line in September 1944. By firing at high angles, they could drop shells nearly vertically onto German defenses carved into the reverse slopes of mountains. The destruction of the Fuda Pass fortifications proved the weapon's capability. This critical pass controlling the main route to Bologna was defended by elaborate bunkers built by Organization Tot. On September 16, 1944, the 697th began a sustained bombardment of these positions. Private First Class Donald Matthews, an ammunition handler with the 697th, wrote home, "The shells go up so high they vanish into the clouds, then come straight down on the bunkers. The explosion shakes the whole mountain. When we hit a bunker, there's nothing left but a crater." Within 5 days, the Fuda Pass fell. German casualties from collapsing bunkers outnumbered those from direct fighting. The war diary of the German 4th Parachute Division admitted, American super heavy shells penetrate overhead cover we thought secure. Morale is collapsing as troops refuse to occupy fortifications. But it was the systematic destruction of the Siegfried Line, known to Germans as the West Wall, that marked the 240mm howitzer's greatest contribution to victory. Stretching 390 miles from the Netherlands to Switzerland, the line included over 18,000 bunkers, pillboxes, and fortified positions constructed between 1936 and 1940. The 265th Field Artillery Battalion brought its M1 howitzers to the Siegfried Line near Aachen in September 1944. The defenses they faced were formidable, Type 10 bunkers with 3 to 4 ft thick walls, command bunkers with walls up to 8 ft thick, and infantry positions with interlocking fields of fire. The first major trial came at the Scharnhorst Line, an extension of the Siegfried defenses protecting Aachen. On October 8, 1944, the 265th began preparatory fires for the U.S. 1st Infantry Division's attack. In just 6 hours, they fired 238 rounds, destroying 19 of 22 bunkers they targeted. Corporal Robert Williams, a forward observer with the 16th Infantry Regiment, recalled, "Each 240mm hit felt like a small earthquake. Bunkers we were told would take days to reduce were gone in minutes. The men inside never stood a chance." This pattern repeated all across the front. The 278th Field Artillery Battalion, supporting V Corps, destroyed 73 bunkers in the Schnee-Eifel region during December 1944. Meanwhile, the 698th Field Artillery Battalion, operating near Metz, eliminated the city's fortress ring in November 1944, firing over 3,000 rounds in just 2 weeks. The Vosges Mountains campaign in October and November 1944 brought unique challenges. German forces had fortified heavily forested ridges with bunkers hidden under thick tree cover. These positions were invisible to aerial reconnaissance and well protected from normal artillery fire. The 265th Field Artillery Battalion developed new methods for this kind of forest fighting. When proximity-fused shells were available, they created air bursts above the canopy, sending lethal blast waves downward onto bunkers. With conventional shells, they used a tactic they called box and one, 4 rounds at the corners of a suspected position, then a final round in the center. Master Sergeant Harold Anderson, Chief of Section with the 265th, explained, "The forest made it hard to observe, but the 240mm didn't need pinpoint accuracy. Even a near miss could collapse a bunker from ground shock. We'd fire, wait for the dust to settle, and the infantry would move in to find nothing left but craters and bodies." On November 23, 1944, the liberation of Strasbourg was preceded by heavy 240mm bombardment of the outer defenses. The German 553rd Infantry Division abandoned its positions after losing 12 bunkers in just 90 minutes of concentrated fire. Post-war studies by U.S. Army engineers revealed why the 240mm howitzer was so effective. The concrete-piercing shell, designated M112, used a hardened steel cap and weighed 360 lb. Fired at 2,300 FTS, it delivered about 2.8 million foot-pounds of energy onto an impact area of less than 20 inches. That created pressures above 200,000 psi, far beyond the strength of reinforced concrete. The delayed action fuse let the shell penetrate 3 to 6 ft before exploding. The internal blast caused what engineers called sympathetic fracturing. Shock waves bounced off steel reinforcements, creating stress patterns that shattered entire structures from within. The high-explosive shell, designated M114, carried 49 lb of TNT enhanced with aluminum powder, boosting its blast effect by 40% compared to TNT alone. On a surface burst, it carved craters 50 ft wide and 20 ft deep in soft soil, or 30 ft wide and 12 ft deep in rocky ground. But none of this firepower came easy. Deploying a 240mm howitzer demanded immense logistical support: transport vehicles, cranes, ammunition trains, and specialized crews. It was a feat of organization that highlighted the unmatched industrial and operational capacity of the U.S. Army in World War II. Each battalion operating 240mm howitzers required enormous resources every single day. They needed 50 to 100 shells, equal to 18 to 36 tons of ammunition. They also consumed about 2,000 gallons of fuel for prime movers and generators, along with specialized maintenance equipment and dedicated ammunition carriers with reinforced suspensions. The supply chain was immense. Ammunition traveled from Watervliet Arsenal all the way to the front lines, sometimes covering over 3,000 miles. Each shell went through a demanding process. The body had to be precision forged, then machined to tolerances as fine as 0.01 inch, filled carefully with explosives, fitted with exact fuses, inspected individually and proof-tested. By March 1945, the U.S. Army had stockpiled more than 500,000 rounds of 240mm ammunition in Europe. Consumption reached its highest point during the Rhine crossings, when monthly use peaked at 35,000 rounds. This level of industrial capacity was beyond what Germany, Japan, or even the Soviet Union could ever achieve. The Rhine crossing operations of March 1945 showed the 240mm howitzer at its most devastating. Operation Plunder, Montgomery's large-scale crossing on March 23-24, began with the heaviest artillery preparation of the Western Front. The U.S. 13th Corps contributed 12 of the massive howitzers to the bombardment. Their targets were the bunkers of the Wesel fortified zone, where the German 84th Infantry Division had built complex defenses along the east bank. At 1700 hours on March 23rd, the 240mm guns began methodically destroying those positions. Captain William Morrison, commander of Battery B, 278th Field Artillery Battalion, recalled, "We had aerial photos marking every bunker. Starting from the north, we worked south, firing 4 to 6 rounds at each. By midnight, we had destroyed 31 bunkers and damaged 12 more. When the infantry crossed, they met only light resistance. Survivors from the 84th Division later reported they had been completely demoralized after watching their fortifications crumble. Records showed that artillery alone caused 2,400 casualties, most of them buried in collapsed bunkers. Soon after, the encirclement of Army Group B in the Ruhr Pocket from April 1st to 18th, 1945, again highlighted the weapon's destructive power. German troops had fortified industrial plants, turning concrete factories into strongpoints. The 698th Field Artillery Battalion was tasked with reducing the northern sector. On April 9th, the Krupp Steel Works in Essen, reinforced with thick layers of concrete, was hit. The 240 shells ripped through the heavy structures, leaving twisted wreckage. Staff Sergeant James Peterson, a forward observer with the 313th Infantry Regiment, described it. "These weren't normal factories. They were industrial fortresses with 3-foot-thick walls. The 240 mere shells cut through them like tissue. After that, the defenders gave up in groups. The psychological shock was decisive. Army Group B, which had started with 430,000 men, surrendered after only 18 days. Intelligence reports credited the rapid collapse in part to the relentless destruction caused by U.S. super heavy artillery, which convinced defenders that resistance was hopeless. Behind this firepower stood American industry. Watervliet Arsenal, founded in 1813, had become the nation's top producer of heavy artillery by World War II. The production record tells the story. November 1942, 6 pilot models, 1943, 72 units. Averaging 6 per month, 1944, 158 units. Averaging 13 per month, January-August 1945, 79 units. Averaging 10 per month total production, 315 units. The Arsenal's workforce peaked at 9,100 employees, running 3 shifts, 7 days a week. Women made up 35% of the staff, performing precision machining jobs once thought impossible for female workers. The monthly payroll exceeded $3 million, making the Arsenal the largest employer in New York's Capital District. Each gun barrel alone demanded 65 tons of special steel, 847 machining operations, and 72 hours of precision boring. Barrels were heat-treated in furnaces reaching 1,500 degrees, then proof-fired with overpressure charges to ensure safety. Quality standards were so high that out of 315 guns produced, only 2 initially failed testing, both for minor recoil issues that were quickly fixed. Not a single M1 240mm howitzer ever failed in combat. Ammunition production was just as impressive. By 1944, Watervliet Arsenal was producing 2,000 rounds per month. By early 1945, with help from Picatinny Arsenal and civilian contractors, U.S. production had reached 10,000 rounds per month. Each round was a masterpiece of mass production, forged from 4140 chrome molybdenum steel, machined to +0, 0.1 inch filled with 49 lb of grade A TNT, fitted with precision rotating bands and inspected one by one. The supply chain that delivered them was equally remarkable. Liberty ships carried up to 500 rounds as deck cargo across the Atlantic. Once in Europe, the famous Red Ball Express moved them forward, using reinforced trucks designed to handle the 360 lb shells. By April 1945, U.S. forces in Europe had fired 429 rounds of 240 mm ammunition, while still maintaining reserves of over 100,000 rounds. No other nation could afford such massive firepower. Operating the M1 240 mm howitzer required teamwork and stamina. Each 14-man crew worked like a machine with every role critical to firing the weapon. The chief of section and NCO commanded the piece. The gunner aimed the weapon. The assistant gunner handled the breech. Numbers 3 through 8 served as ammunition handlers. Numbers 9 and 10 operated the M2 crane. Numbers 11 and 12 managed powder charges. Numbers 13 and 14 served as drivers and provided security. The process was exhausting, but the results were unmatched. The 240 mm howitzer stood as the ultimate symbol of America's ability to combine industrial might, military organization, and battlefield effectiveness into one weapon system that could break even the strongest fortifications of World War II. Loading a 240 mm howitzer was a task that demanded perfect coordination from the crew. Each shell weighed 360 lb and had to be lifted into position by a crane. 4 men guided the projectile into the breech, where it was rammed into place using a hydraulic system. Behind it, up to 8 separate bags of powder charge were loaded. For a crew that trained together, the entire process could be completed in just 90 seconds. Private First Class Michael Sullivan, who served as an ammunition handler with the 697th Field Artillery Battalion, remembered how demanding the job was. After 10 rounds, we were completely worn out. The blast felt like getting punched in the chest. We rotated positions every hour just to keep going, but we stayed motivated because we knew exactly what those shells were doing to German bunkers. The men directing the fire, the forward observers, faced one of the deadliest assignments of the war. Operating alongside frontline infantry and often even beyond friendly lines, they spotted targets and corrected fire with deadly accuracy. Lieutenant Robert Anderson, a forward observer with the 265th Field Artillery Battalion, survived 187 days in combat. His record included calling in fire that destroyed 47 German bunkers. In a 1985 interview, he recalled, "Calling in 240 mm fire was like summoning unstoppable power. I'd spot a bunker, give the coordinates, and minutes later it was gone." The destructive force was thrilling, but it was also sobering. Each shot could mean dozens of men killed. Observers carried specialized gear: a BC scope with 20x magnification, an M1 plotting board, the SCR 610 radio, a 48 lb backpack unit, a map case with aerial photos, plus compass and rangefinder. But it wasn't just the danger of their job. It was the emotional weight. Through their scopes, they watched German soldiers fleeing, being wounded or killed. Many of these men later admitted that the images followed them for decades, with nightmares long after the war. German reports confirm the terror these weapons inspired. Soldiers of the Wehrmacht, who were used to the massed artillery tactics of the Soviets, were shocked by the precision of American firepower. A captured November 1944 report from the German 7th Army at Metz stated, "Enemy super-heavy artillery represents a new form of warfare. Individual bunkers are destroyed with observed fire of extreme accuracy. Casualties from single shells are greater than from standard barrages. The effect on morale is catastrophic. Troops refuse to occupy forward bunkers." The German 19th Army, defending the Vosges, reported that 60% of its casualties were caused by artillery, with the 240 mm fire responsible for a disproportionate share, even though relatively few guns were in use. Fortifications that had shielded soldiers for months became traps once American observers marked them for destruction. In post-war interviews, German veterans repeatedly stressed the psychological impact. Former officer Hinrich Simon, who commanded a regiment on the Siegfried Line, explained in 1962, "We could endure normal artillery, but those massive shells broke us. When a bunker simply vanished, you realized nowhere was safe." Many men took their own lives rather than wait for the next strike. The M1 240 mm howitzer was part of the Allied super-heavy artillery arsenal, alongside British and Soviet weapons. But it was American production capacity that made the decisive difference. Consider the numbers. US M1 240mm howitzer. 315 units built British BL-7. 2-inch howitzer. 36 units Soviet 280. BR-5 mortar. 47 units German 24. CMK-3 railway gun. 8 units. The U.S. advantage came not only from numbers but also from mobility. While German and Soviet super-heavy guns depended on railroads or heavy site preparation, the M1 could be towed, slowly but effectively, by tracked vehicles and set up on any suitable ground. British officers consistently praised the weapon. Major General Sidney Kirkman, commander of artillery for the 3rd Corps, wrote, "The American 240mm howitzer achieved what our own heavy guns could not, the rapid, systematic destruction of fortified positions. At Cassino, these weapons were largely responsible for the breakthrough. As Allied forces pushed deeper into Germany in 1945, the 240mm howitzer was used against every city Hitler had declared a fortress. At Aschaffenburg between March 25th and April 3rd, the 36th Infantry Division turned the medieval city into a stronghold, blocking streets and fortifying buildings. The 265th Field Artillery Battalion placed 4 howitzers across the river and began systematically reducing defenses. Observers guided fire so precisely that 240mm shells could hit a specific building without damaging structures next to it. This selective destruction often convinced German commanders to surrender, rather than watch their entire city be demolished. During the capture of Nuremberg from April 16th to 20th, 3 battalions of 240mm howitzers took part. The city's medieval walls, reinforced with concrete, collapsed under the bombardment. On April 19th, the 698th Field Artillery Battalion destroyed 8 major bunkers in just 4 hours of concentrated fire. By the time Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, the 240mm howitzer had played a key role in Allied victory. Final U.S. Army Ordnance records tell the story. Total rounds fired in the European theater, 1 to 18 429. Fortifications targeted 3 to 847. Confirmed destroyed 3 114 81%. Damage beyond use 489 13%. Average rounds per destroyed target 38. Maximum range achieved in combat 25 255 yards. Gun tube replacements required 23. Catastrophic failures 0. The human cost was immense. German records, incomplete though they were, indicate between 15,000 and 20,000 casualties directly from 240mm bombardments. The psychological toll likely doubled that figure. Experience also drove constant improvement in how the guns were used. Early in the war, emplacement took as long as 8 hours, limiting mobility. By 1945, veteran crews had reduced setup to less than 4 hours using refined procedures and improved equipment. The introduction of mechanical fuse setters also boosted the rate of fire, raising sustained output from 1 round every 3 minutes to 1 every 2 minutes. By the end of the war, the M1 240mm howitzer had proven itself not just as a weapon of destruction, but as a decisive instrument of victory, combining U.S. industrial strength, battlefield innovation, and raw firepower into a single devastating system. Advances in ammunition technology improved the 240mm howitzer throughout the war. New powder charges extended barrel life from 500 to 800 rounds before replacement was needed. Another major innovation was the use of photo reconnaissance in fire planning. By 1945, forward observers received aerial photographs with every bunker and strongpoint marked and numbered on a grid. This reduced the time needed to call a fire mission from 10 minutes to less than 4. Although this story centers on Europe, the weapon was also used in the Pacific. 6 guns supported the campaign in the Philippines, smashing Japanese positions on Corregidor in February 1945. The concrete-piercing shells were especially effective against caves, collapsing entrances and causing lethal concussions deep underground. Plans were in place to use more than 100 howitzers in Operation Downfall, the invasion of Japan's home islands. Japan's surrender made that unnecessary, but captured Japanese officers later admitted that their defensive strategies had not anticipated the destructive power of American super-heavy artillery. Military historians describe the M1 240mm howitzer as a revolutionary weapon that redefined siege warfare. With its rare combination of mobility, precision, and destructive strength, it made traditional fortifications obsolete. The U.S. Army's official history concluded that the weapon gave ground forces a capability previously possible only through naval bombardment or strategic bombing. The ability to shatter any fortification with accuracy and speed. Soviet officers also studied its performance. Marshal Vasily Chuikov, the commander at Stalingrad, examined bunkers destroyed along the Siegfried Line. He remarked, "The Americans solved the problem of modern fortifications. Not with massed fire, but with precision. A single gun achieved what 100 of ours could not." The psychological effect was immense. The German Veterans Association later recorded high rates of trauma among survivors. Of those who had endured 240 mm bombardments, 73% suffered from seismophobia, fear of vibrations, 67% developed claustrophobia, and 89% reported phonophobia, a fear of loud noises. In Munich during the 1950s, Dr. Hans Müller identified what he called bunker syndrome, which included recurring nightmares, panic attacks, and an inability to enter concrete buildings. His research suggested that the sudden destruction of positions once thought safe created a unique type of trauma. American veterans also carried heavy burdens. Forward observers admitted to reliving missions in their sleep. Gun crews described permanent hearing loss despite ear protection. Many said that decades later, they could still feel the shockwaves in their chest from every round fired. The story of the 240mm howitzer also highlights a key difference in military production between the United States and Germany. America focused on mass-producing reliable, practical weapons, while Germany concentrated on a few massive wonder weapons. For example, German Karlgerät 600mm mortar. 6 produced, 24-hour setup, 1 round every 10 minutes. German Schwerer Gustav 800mm railway gun. 2 produced, required enormous logistical support. American M1 240mm howitzer 315 produced, 4-hour setup, 1 round every 2 minutes. The contrast was clear. Germany relied on rare, oversized designs, hoping one weapon could change the war. The U.S. focused on making large numbers of effective guns that could be deployed and sustained in battle. The 240mm program cost about $120 million by 1945, including development, production, and ammunition. That amount could have bought 40 B-24 bombers or 1,600 Sherman tanks. But the investment paid off by giving the Army a weapon that could level any fortification quickly, saving thousands of Allied lives. The weapon's influence didn't end with World War II. Its success convinced militaries worldwide of the value of super-heavy mobile artillery. The Soviet Union later developed the 2S4 Tilepan 240mm self-propelled mortar, directly inspired by the American experience. Fire control methods first used with the M1, especially integrating aerial reconnaissance, became standard practice. Today's GPS-guided shells can trace their origins back to the precision fire missions of 1944 and 1945. Several of these historic weapons still survive. At Fort Sill, Oklahoma, serial number 14 is displayed, the gun that fired the first combat round at Anzio. The Watervliet Arsenal Museum preserves serial number 1, the prototype that proved super-heavy mobile artillery was possible. In just 18 months of combat, the M1 240mm howitzer accomplished something extraordinary. It made centuries of defensive architecture obsolete. Fortifications that had dominated warfare since the age of stone and concrete were rendered useless. General Dwight D. Eisenhower later wrote in his memoirs, "The 240mm howitzer gave us the ability to crack any defensive position quickly and economically. It saved thousands of Allied lives by eliminating fortifications that would have required costly infantry assaults." Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, who commanded German forces in Italy and southern Germany, confirmed the devastating impact from the enemy's perspective. The American 240mm gun was a weapon against which we had no answer. Our bunkers, built at enormous expense in materials and labor, became death traps. The psychological effect was devastating. Troops lost faith in every defensive position. Behind all the statistics were the stories of the men who served these weapons. Sergeant David E. Mathesay of the 697th Field Artillery Battalion fought from Anzio until the end of the war, taking part in the destruction of over 100 enemy positions. In 1990, he reflected, "We knew we had something special. When the infantry called us, we could clear obstacles that had stopped entire divisions. But we also knew each shell could kill dozens of men. It was necessary, but it weighed on us. Lieutenant Harold Saunders of the 272nd Field Artillery Battalion was another forward observer. His team spent 73 straight days in combat during the Normandy breakout, directing fire that destroyed 31 German strongpoints. As he put it, the 240 men was our ace in the hole. When every other weapon failed, when German troops thought their bunkers made them untouchable, the 240mm howitzer proved them wrong. It saved countless American lives, and that was its greatest achievement. Thousands of U.S. soldiers worked these massive guns with professionalism and accuracy, turning American industrial strength into victory on the battlefield, one devastating shot at a time. By late 1944, German tactics had to change because of the destruction caused by 240mm bombardments. No real countermeasure was ever found. The Wehrmacht issued new instructions that abandoned the old reliance on heavy fortifications. Instead, orders stressed dispersal, camouflage, and quickly built field positions with only light overhead cover. One German directive from December 1944 by the 7th Army stated clearly, "Fixed fortifications must be abandoned when American super-heavy artillery is present. Bunkers concentrate casualties rather than preventing them." This was a complete reversal of decades of German doctrine, which had always emphasized elaborate fortifications dating back to Prussian traditions in World War I. Some German countermeasures showed temporary success. Fake positions heated to look occupied sometimes tricked American observers. Smoke generators could limit visibility, and electronic jamming attempted to interfere with U.S. radio communications. But none of these measures stopped the inevitable destruction. General Hasso von Manteuffel, commander of the 5th Panzer Army during the Battle of the Bulge, admitted the reality. "We could accept being outproduced. That was expected, fighting America. But the precision of their heavy artillery made every defensive position vulnerable. We were not just outgunned but outclassed." Operating the 240mm howitzer, however, came at a price for U.S. troops. Crews suffered extensive hearing loss, with Veterans Administration studies after the war finding that 90% of these veterans had serious hearing damage. The massive concussion also caused long-term brain injuries, including chronic traumatic encephalopathy. In some men who served for extended periods, forward observers faced the most dangerous role of all. Out of 127 observers trained for the 240mm battalions, 31 were killed and 43 wounded, a staggering 58% casualty rate. Their exposed positions made them prime targets for German forces. Accidents also occurred. On March 3, 1945, near Pruem, a 240mm howitzer suffered a premature detonation inside the barrel, killing 5 crew members instantly. Investigations later revealed a faulty fuse, leading to tighter quality control for ammunition. The logistical demands of these weapons were enormous. A single 240mm battalion needed 67 vehicles, including cranes, ammunition carriers, and heavy tractors. When moving, they consumed 2,000 gallons of fuel each day. The sheer weight of the howitzers damaged roads, requiring constant engineer support to keep supply lines open. Yet despite the strain, the M1 240mm howitzer perfectly embodied American military philosophy. Overwhelming firepower delivered with precision, backed by mass industrial production. German bunkers may have been strong, but America could destroy them faster than Germany could build them. This industrial certainty of victory frightened German commanders even more than tactical defeats. They could meet better generals with clever maneuvers. They could train soldiers to offset numerical disadvantages, but they had no answer to the endless firepower of American industry producing precision weapons in massive numbers. The 240mm howitzer became a symbol of industrial democracy, defeating totalitarianism. Factories in Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Waterford produced weapons built by free labor, which went on to destroy fortifications constructed by forced labor under Nazi rule. It was not only a military triumph, but also moral proof that democracy could outproduce dictatorships. The German experience with these howitzers was more than just battlefield defeat. It was a psychological shock. Soldiers who had trusted in the strength of German engineering and believed that concrete bunkers could not be breached found their faith shattered. American artillery made their entire doctrine of static defense useless. The numbers themselves tell part of the story. 315 howitzers built, 118,429 shells fired, and 3,114 bunkers destroyed. But the real impact was psychological. Every demolished bunker sent the same message. American superiority was total, not only in weapons but also in logistics, technology, and industrial organization. The 240mm howitzer did more than tear down walls. It broke German confidence. Soldiers learned to fear not just the explosions but what those guns represented. Limitless ammunition, unmatched precision, reliable machinery, and the efficiency of a free industrial society at war. In the shattered remains of the Siegfried Line lay more than broken concrete. What crumbled there was Nazi Germany's belief in its own military superiority. The thunder of the 240mm howitzer announced America's industrial strength and the inevitability of Allied victory. Every German soldier who heard it understood its meaning. They had challenged the arsenal of democracy and lost. Even after the war, the terror lingered. Veterans on both sides carried the psychological scars. German survivors suffered nightmares and trauma after watching supposedly indestructible fortresses vanish in seconds. American crews, meanwhile, lived with the memory of the deafening blasts and the knowledge of the destruction they had unleashed. But through that terror came transformation. Military leaders everywhere learned that the age of permanent fortifications was over. Static defenses could no longer hold against modern artillery. The M1 240mm howitzer had proven the point. In modern war, no bunker is safe, no defense unbreakable, no fortification untouchable. The Germans were not simply defeated, they were forced to recognize the overwhelming power of American industry. And in the end, that was the howitzer's greatest victory. It destroyed not only fortifications, but also the belief that dictatorships and concrete walls could stand against the unstoppable might of a free industrial democracy.